Crazy Stupid Podcast.
Thank you all so much for tuning in. As always, if this is your first time watching, we'd love it if you could hit the like button, the subscribe button, and the bell so that you are aware of when we post things.
Alrighty, hello everybody. Welcome back to another, probably just a little mini episode of Crazy Stupid Podcast. We have literally just come back from the movies after seeing the new film Civil War. Spoilers ahead, we will talk about the entire movie from start to finish, and you should definitely go and see it before listening to this episode. Man, oh man, oh man, oh man. Essentially, this movie, directed and written by Alex Garland from A24, it follows a group of journalists throughout America in the midst of a civil war in like modern day times. One of the things that you and I were talking about in the elevator before going to the movie was what's the split? Like, what's the Civil War about?
Yeah.
You think, because it's like Civil War in America in today's politics, you think it's going to be like an analysis on American politics and like the division in America and how things could play out.
Liberals versus conservatives.
Yeah. Or like big city versus rural. But like, that's not at all what the film is about. Like, that is not at all what the film is about. And honestly, they don't really define the division at all. The first thing that you hear is a speech from the president where, again, my expectation is, oh, this is where you guys are going to lay out the context. You're going to be like, okay, this is how we got here, whatever. But no, that's really not what happens. What you see is him obviously about to give a speech that's very clearly going to be propaganda. And then, like, he does mention states, but the states, like, don't have, in our context, any political alignment. So you can't really draw any context. California, Texas have seceded from the nation. Immediately I was like, California, Texas. He mentions like Florida trying to, but there's like no definition of what this division is about at all.
Yeah. You get a few hints of some things though through dialogue of the journalists. When they're like spitfiring questions about a hypothetical scenario of when they could potentially see the president, they throw things out like the third term, which already it's giving fascism. Then they also mention other things like what they did with Antifa.
The Antifa massacre.
I mean, you see other things like the banning of, like, he sort of disbars the FBI, and that gives you a little bit of an idea of the state of the country.
Yeah.
To an extent.
To me, I felt like the film was like, who's right and wrong in this situation actually is sort of immaterial. To me, I thought the point was really about like the neutrality of these journalists and like the limit of that neutrality in any given situation, whoever they are. But when they interact with people throughout the film and come across like combatants, like people who are clearly fighting in the war, there's not that many like obvious visual clues of like who they're fighting for. I think that they're definitely hinting at like what made people upset, but they're not necessarily telling us like who is right and who is safe for this group of people. To me, I felt like it was more so trying to talk to us about like this neutral group of people. And like the idea of like, like on a very basic level, like the ethics of being like a war journalist and like what that requires of people. But on a higher level, I think like questions about like neutrality in general, the ethics of it, the limits of it, and also like this idea of like a neutral press. What is that? Does that exist? Does that have like moral value?
Does it have ethical limitations too?
Yeah. The first thing that sort of popped out to me was the scene where they're in New York and they go to that protest and Jessie is hurt because she doesn't have the press vest.
Yeah.
Like the press vest is supposed to be safe because it marks you as neutral. You are simply here to watch and document.
Yeah.
That is basically it. And the visuals of the press vest show up in the film all over the place. We've seen a lot of press vests on TikTok recently in Gaza. I just kept being reminded of that because they are not neutral press at all.
Yeah.
Like they take very clear stances. When they're reporting facts, but they are not standing by. They're not here to just report and that's it. They're not just bystanders. They can't be. To me, that's kind of what I was thinking of throughout the film. You know, there's a lot of war movies out there that, you know, talk about like the costs of war and the ethics of war. But a lot of times still in the end, there is like this like, and in the end we won. It cost us a lot, but we won. And there's kind of this like victory. There's this kind of like adrenaline, you know, in that final battle scene. And in this final battle scene, I felt very, very emotional because of Kirsten Dunst.
Yeah.
Because of the journey that Jessie Jesse was on, they were going in different directions. Like they were both essentially going to end up where the other one started. So because of that, like Jesse could no longer be that grounding, like that emotional grounding like she was throughout the film for most of the fight scenes. Most notably though, when she was asked to intervene, when they went to that place, to that gas station, and they saw the two men being tortured, and she was directly confronted with the choice to intervene on behalf of these people, and Kirsten Dunst's character steps in and stops her and doesn't allow that,
even prevents her from asking that question,
yeah,
will they survive? The way it's sort of presented initially is like that's a code of journalism that's sort of like generally accepted, but now that I'm kind of done with the film, I'm like, maybe you should start asking those questions.
It's generally accepted because people believe in the value of giving the information
and letting like us.
Yes. To me, the reason why I feel like Kirsten Dunst is at where she's at the end of the film when they're in that final battle in DC is because she is confronted with the fact that she spent her whole career doing that and it didn't do a thing.
Yeah.
She says that earlier in the film when she's having that conversation with Sammy, where she says, you know, I spent my whole career like in these war zones, and every time that I survived and I got the shot, I thought it was, a warning. It's like, don't do this. And in the end, like it doesn't work. Like it doesn't prevent anything from happening. And when it eventually costs her, when all of a sudden that press fest and that neutrality isn't protecting them anymore and her own colleagues are being shot down and gunned down, and when she's seeing like this has not worked, to me it felt like that idea was being questioned of like, is there true value and impact in just being there to watch it happen and show it to the rest of us? Is that worthwhile? And I don't know, like maybe it is. Like we need people to show us these things, but like there was so many moments in the film that felt morally conflicting for me. All of these shots, and every time that they take a picture they're like, oh, I got a great shot, and it's of a person dying. It's like of their last moments.
Something I do find interesting, kind of what you were getting at, the scene with Kirsten Dunst's character Lee when she gets shot protecting Jesse. Jesse, she doesn't hesitate to take multiple pictures of Lee, Kirsten's character. And she also doesn't look at her body until she's about ready to leave. I sort of juxtapose that with Lee's character when she takes a picture of Sammy and she ends up deleting it.
Yes.
And that juxtaposition reminded me of the conversation that Sammy and Lee have when they're on their way, and Sammy sort of speaks on behalf of Lee when Joe comes over, and then he says essentially like Lee is questioning like, is the work that we're doing of journalism like even worth it anymore? Is it even working? And I do wonder if like you got 3 generations worth of journalism between Sammy, Lee, Joe, and then obviously Jesse, where you start to see like the erosion in like the value and ethics and like morality of sort of journalism sort of existing. Like I feel like Sammy's generation, like they keep saying that like he's old, but a lot of the wisdom and a lot of the decisions he makes is like normally right, or he ends up saving their life in a lot of those instances. I feel like for him, he kind of reminds me of like the Walter Cronkite era of journalism, when people turn on the news like they knew they were going to get something trustworthy. And with Sammy, like he feels very much like a trustworthy person. Everything that he says and does feels very virtuous to an extent, right? Things happen in Vietnam and they knew they were going to get honest answers because of Walter Cronkite. Like he had gained their trust. That transparency, it erodes over the next several decades in our country's history. And I'm not trying to say that like when we reach Jessie, she is like completely apathetic, but I do think she did not intake the lessons that Lee was trying to tell her throughout the entire film so far. Because Lee is trying to tell like, listen, I am a cautionary tale. Like you don't want to end up like this. But Jessie is, remember, like she said, like I've never been so scared, but I've also been like very alive. Like she connected with Joel a few times when they were in the heat of a lot of that intense, violent moments. That was thrilling for her. And I do feel like her character to me reminded me of just like this sensationalism of journalism right now, like the state that they're in right now, because you saw that shift in those final moments. She had to get pulled back multiple times, almost got hit multiple times, but like it didn't, none of that like really mattered.
No, she just wanted the shot.
She wants to be not just one the shot, she wants to be the first person to get it too. They kept saying that multiple times in the film also, which again feels very eerie because it's such a, it's such a cautionary to where journalism right now.
I like that analogy a lot. I was also thinking too about like in the final moments with the president.
Yeah. Oh, I got thoughts on that too.
Again, I feel like every time that they were in a moment of violence, the point just just kept coming across to me that in this moment, it actually doesn't matter who was right and who was wrong. Like, people are dying, right? Like, it's tragedy no matter what. It's tragic either way. And in the moment with the president, when he sees the president and they're about to shoot him and he says, stop, wait. And for a moment, you're like, And then he's like, I need to get a quote. And then the president says, please don't let them kill me. Like, his last words are a plea for him to abandon his neutral stance. And the thing is, though, it's not neutral anymore. Him standing and doing nothing, to me, does not appear neutral in this instant, right? Like, when she shoots that picture and you see him standing there next to all of the guards in their fatigues, he doesn't look like a neutral bystander press person in that photo. He looks like he was a co-conspirator, like he is a part of this too. And he's not, realistically, and there's very little that he really could have done, but the visuals of it like just speak so loud.
It's interesting too, they sort of talked a little bit about, like, they mentioned dictators, which 3-term president, like, that's a dictator. Listen, Nick Offerman, I felt a lot of empathy because, like, he just has that face that just screams, I don't even know, like, just empathy. You know what I mean? But nonetheless, they had that conversation in the minivan. I was on their way there, and they talk about, they mentioned people like Mussolini, and they mentioned all these other guys of, like, honestly, when you get up close to him and ask him the questions, essentially it's a bit anticlimactic, right? Because, you know, the PR and the marketing, they do an extraordinary job with the propaganda to make these individuals like larger than life, and they put together these speeches to like bring out their charisma, but that's not them. That's like an orchestrated version of them, right? And in that moment, again, it kind of showed like Sammy was kind of right. Like, I felt like the president was desperate. He had no other cards to play, but that felt extremely different in terms of power dynamics with how you were initially introduced to him, which feels like, again, it just gives you a bit of like a psychological perspective on individuals that take the position of a dictator. They're kind of fragile. A little bit. I mean, we touched a little bit about earlier. I thought they did a really good job. Obviously, like, they showed scenes of like, it's not really clear who's who. And I think they did that pretty crafty with the uniforms also. It became harder for me to know, like, at first, like, oh, this person's wearing cameo, so that must mean, oh, but no, later on, the other side's wearing it. So now you genuinely have no idea, which I thought was pretty clever.
I also thought it was clever how they, like, up until the end, like, the motives of the individual people fighting was kind of unclear.
And it
was just kind of like, I'm fighting because they're fighting me.
And also the motives felt different in each of the stops that they went to also.
Yeah.
Like, Jesse Plum's character, his motive felt very nationalistic. That was different than when they were at the stop with the sniper, where it's just like, I'm just trying to survive here. You know what I mean? Versus the initial stop when they were in New York City. All right, y'all. We want to thank you all so much for tuning in. And with that, we're going to see you all next time. Take care, everyone. Peace.